Hi Tara, welcome to Brands, Brews and Banter. I'm so excited to have you. I've been like I mentioned, I've been like stalking everything that you've said and written over the entire last evening, and fantastic stuff. You've had a beautiful career, so thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here. A little nervous, just in terms of where you're going to go with the questions, but excited to have a pretty open conversation and see where it goes.
So nothing. This is like a normally it's now started becoming like a therapy session which people don't pay me for. So I have to what were you like as a kid, and people go into some like then I have
Oh
to edit
wow,
it.
intense.
I have to edit it later, right? but but tell me like as a kid, right? Like not tell me when did you know that hey I'm going to like, and I understand that you started with journalism and then you kind of moved your way in. But what were you as a kid in school, and like when did you know कि ठीक है ये कर सकते हैं ये नहीं करेंगे?
Absolutely. I think great question. And I think for me, I moved to boarding school when I was 12 years old, and I spent basic sixth grade to 12th grade in boarding. And what's nice about that as an experience, I think, is it makes you a lot more independent in some senses, and you sort of start really reflecting on who you are as a person. And it sounds a little intense to say that as a teenager, but I think when you're living with just kids throughout, it is intense in general. So you kind of start figuring out your likes, dislikes pretty early on. Um, and through that, I think because it was an international school, you got to pick subjects that you liked and things that you found interesting. And I had a really weird mix of subjects, so I was studying biology, but I hated other sciences. I just liked biology because I was interested in, knowing a little bit more about the body and dissecting frogs and things like that. But I hated chemistry and physics. So I studied biology till about 10th grade. I loved English. We had a course on journalism. So I was the editor of my school paper. Along with that, I was the editor for my school yearbook. So these were some of the extracurricular things I was doing, but those were actually the places that I realized I had the strongest interest. I used to get special permission to stay overnight at school to work on the paper, to work on the yearbook, because you had those same intense deadlines that you do at work. And sometimes you have to pull those all-nighters, and we'd get a staff on duty so that they could monitor us to make sure it was all okay. But like it was literally doing all-nighters for work, and it was purely because we really enjoyed it, right? So I think that was where I was about 16, 17 at that age, where I was like, oh my God, I love this work. Like, and I knew it was an interest in media, but when you're in school, you just assume it's journalism because you take apples to apples, right? So you're like, I'm the editor of my paper, so that means that I like journalism. I didn't understand that I actually probably really enjoyed media and production. And the art of creating something from scratch. But for me at that point, it was, hey, I like journalism, so I'm going to be a journalist. And that's where journalism school sort of happened. So I would say it started when I was about 16, but I think the clarity of being in marketing or doing the work that I'm doing now came much later in life. But it started around there in terms of being like, hey, I'm interested in media and content creation.
What boarding school was this though?
It's Woodstock. It's in
You
Missouri.
went Woodstock, yeah, of course I know. So you were like fancy kid.
Not really. I think my parents just found education important and put a lot of money towards that, and deprioritized everything else in their lives. So
Yeah.
hats off to them for doing that for me. But yeah.
Yeah, I did go to like of course I schooled in Delhi, so we went for a debate once to St. George's, and I remember going to Woodstock, and I was like, "Arey, ये तो बहुत fancy है." मतलब like it's like that. So it was like one of my like Karan Johar kind of school. I don't know what is that school, student of the year shit school. ना yes, student of the
Yeah,
year.
I think these hyped experience of what boarding school actually is. Ultimately, you're eating really basic dal chawal. You don't have too many luxuries. So when we were in school, we'd be freezing cold. It was really cold in the winter. You'd be
Yeah.
like all huddled around one Bukhari trying to warm yourselves up and things like that. So there are the boarding school struggles as well. But yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. I think it was a great experience for me.
So when you were say 16 or so, and you was like, ठीक है, journalism करेंगे, were you like, okay, I will change the world, or were you like, okay, like what side were you on? Were you on the more activist side, or were you on, okay, I'm just going to become the most famous journalist in the world? Like, what was
I think it was that whole like I think when you're a kid you're a lot more idealistic, right? So that whole idea of like, oh my God, I can be this path-breaking journalist and I will change the world. I think that was the mindset. Which is great because like when you're a kid, there's no boundary of what you can do in life, right? Like the world's your oyster kind of a thing, right? Like it's kind of open-ended. And I think the mindset was that yeah, I'm gonna go do this, I'm gonna expose stories that people haven't, put out there. I'm gonna be out going to rural parts of the country and putting out these stories that nobody knows. Obviously that's a very different world of what I'm doing right now in some shape or form. But that was the idea when I was young for sure.
Yeah, so tell me that all of that idealism, like all of that altruism or whatever else. What the disappointments like in your first job when you actually started working?
Yeah, I think when I started looking for my first job, it was peak recession, 2008, 2009. And I think that's your first reality check, right? When you're trying to find a job when there are none available and you suddenly feel so small because suddenly you're like struggling, you're trying to figure things out. And, you initially think that, oh my God, I'm going to have so many choices. And then ultimately you're like, oh my God, this is the only job I'm getting right now. So I'm going to take this. Um, that's sort of what happened, right? So I had applied for, I think, 3 or 4 jobs at that point. My focus when I was in journalism school was TV, because I told you I liked the production side. So I knew I liked audiovisual. And then I had a very, very intimidating interview with Times Now. Um, I think Arnab had actually spoken to a few people at that point, and it was intense, and I just didn't like that style of interviewing, and I don't do well with that sort of like these intense interrogation kind of interviews. And I didn't get that offer. And then I ended up getting a job with UTVI, right, which was it's now Bloomberg. And when I was there, it became Bloomberg UTV, but it was UTV's business news channel. Um, and the way our system worked at that point was if you get one offer, you're out of the pool because they wanted to make sure as many students got placed as possible. So it was like either you take this offer or you're out of our recruitment process and you have to find a job on your own. So I was like, cool, I will take this offer. Um, and it was really bad. Like it was like I can't even remember. I think it was like 10,000 rupees a month or something like that for a Bombay job. And we would live like 4 or 5 of us in one apartment, and you're just about covering rent with your salary. So it was a struggle, right? So I think those were the realities of that first job, being like, hey, forget about like trying to put out these path breaking stories. First of all, you're in a business channel. I wanted to be in general news at that point, right, which is why Times Now, but I took a business job. Business news for me at that point was really boring, right? Like, because I was like, hey, the stock market coverage, I don't understand anything about it. And I was on a 7 a.m. shift, so the realities of what this job meant, I think hit me very early on. And then a lot of it was just like, hey, how do I get through my day to day of life, and how do I make my life better? Because you're sort of struggling in that early phase. So I think that was just where the bubble burst as a starting point, and then I sort of just tried to figure out things from there. So the idealism disappeared very, very quickly, as you can tell.
Yeah, I love that. I love the yeah, I love yeah. I think that's what happens. Especially, I think Bombay does that to people for some reason, right? Like especially like try living in Bombay on a salary, like whatever. Like most of us start on salaries equivalent to that, right? And Sara, all idealism like goes out of the window at Matunga station, and that's the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's that ultimate like I guess it's also a privileged narrative, but you're like, hey, this is my struggler story, right? Like, so you feel like you're just struggling for your day to day, but it's not like, I mean, it could be a lot worse, right? But I think it was just sort of, hey, how do I make things better for myself right now, and how do I improve my current scenario and start making some money that I can actually save? I think those became the larger issues for me at that point, for sure.
So let's get back. Like, tell me how did times now happen, and then I want to pick on the brand equity gig, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. So yeah, so I think for me, like I said, I shifted to Bloomberg, and I think I realized that I wasn't a business news channel, but I was in production at that point, which meant I was producing the live news bulletins, which is very, very robotic after a point. In fact, in the US, the job that I was doing has actually become a job that a robot does because it is a robotic job. And I think I was just like, okay, I need to be in something that's slightly more editorial, because at that point I was like, oh, I love production, right? So I told you it was that mindset of it being a smaller box when you're a kid. So it was like, I want to be in production. I was really adamant about it. And then I realized I was not like, I don't want to do this robotic button pushing job. And then I started looking out. And there was a couple of positions that had opened up. So my network at ACJ, basically, there were a few people who were at ET already who were like, hey, there's a position that's opening up. Why don't you interview for it? And I went through that process. And I eventually got the job. So it was the producer slash reporter for brand equity. And I shifted there, was there for about 4 years. And I know you have some questions about this, so I'm going to pause so that you can
Yeah.
drill away.
Yeah. So do you think brand equity is at fault for making people talk about brand purpose in every episode?
I
Yeah,
wouldn't say brand equity is at fault. I would say
it
all of
is.
the ADMA publications are at fault
Yeah,
for that.
they are. But how did you add to this mediocrity?
I would say I didn't. I actually give a lot of credit to brand equity for doing a little more than just asking generic questions. I think that's the Times Group for you in general, right? I think it's a lot more about like to a point of almost becoming too intense in some ways. But the idea was to always ask the hard questions, and I think we also never shied away from doing negative stories about campaigns that went wrong. So we were actually like I did a lot of stories on scam ads that sort of went out from GoAfest. That was the time like GoAfest was rampant and like really full of scam before they went through this whole rebranding that they've gone through. But I did a lot of these expose kind of stories that were hard, right? And and I'm still really in touch with the people who I covered those stories on. So it's like this combination of building relationship, but also asking hard questions. So for me, actually, I think uh it wasn't like I think there was mediocrity in terms of production quality and those kind of things, but I think in terms of editorial, brand equity, and the Times Group in general did a pretty decent job of asking harder questions, which I appreciated.
No, to be fair, I'm just kidding. Like the brand equity print was like literally a rite of passage for a lot of people, and then I remember like literally storing those for months and months and months, and like just having them, and I still remember some of the artwork, like just stunning. I watched lot less on TV,
Yeah,
because just
no,
access,
I agree. Yeah,
but just access. But yeah, the print and the way I think what brand equity has done for the ecosystem, right? Of course, a lot of the conclaves aside, like which which I'm not a fan of, but like just the sheer journalism and like bringing stuff out in a way with a high bar on quality. I think brand equity has over the years like done like substantial service to the ecosystem, and just that like marketers don't have to justify a lot of things internally. I think that's a function of the platform which brand equity and ET largely as an ecosystem kind of gave to marketers and advertising professionals. So I absolutely love that, to be fair.
yeah. Yeah, I think it was interesting. I mean, I often say this, right? Like for me, this was my exposure on the marketing and advertising ecosystem, right? This is where I really understood what goes on behind creating campaigns, and I think that's what I found exciting, right? To me, um and being on the side of being the journalist, right? Like you get so much exposure in terms of who you get to meet and who you get to ask questions to, and you get the liberty to ask whatever you want, right? So even though and that's the hard part, right? Like what you were saying about conclaves and things like that, ultimately they're just for these publications to be able to make money. And the struggle for journalism, and it's 90% of the reason why I left the industry, right? Is that you just can't make money there. Like, and it's a struggle between ethics of journalism versus keeping publications alive, right? Vice, publication that I admired so much, and I worked there for a short period of time, went through that same situation. They've shut down one of the best websites that I think existed, and it's tragic because it was one of the places that actually put out really compelling, very powerful editorial content. And like a job like Vice was sort of what I aspired for, especially when I was young. And to see those kind of publications shut down, I think is tragic. And how do you balance that? I think that's the struggle for journalism, and that's also why the quality of craft goes down, because people who really are committed to it end up leaving. And they try, like, Faye D'Souza is the one exception of somebody who's stuck to being a journalist even after leaving that ecosystem and is figuring out how to balance making that money as well as putting out credible news. But it's not easy, and even on top of that, she also gets a lot of flack and a lot of hate, right? So you have to be really, really brave and have a really thick skin to be able to do things like that. And most people end up leaving it because they don't have the support of a corporate backing them.
Well,
Intense.
the Vice,
Sorry.
no, no, like I'm like big fan of Vice, and like everybody is, right. There's nothing to dislike about what they were doing and the value they were adding to the world, and like just stunning stuff, right? Even if you look at it today, it is just stunning. Like those have now become styles of doing stories and styles of doing
Mhm.
animation, styles of doing voiceovers, and it's just like the most amazing playbook. But do you think like this? There's also like a different voice in my head which says that like market forces, like the audiences are like super efficient in rewarding what stays and rewarding what doesn't. Uh,
Yeah.
so while there is something which the world needs, but then if market forces don't reward it long enough, then it kind of dies a natural death. Like where are you on that debate?
I think the problem is especially when it comes to news, right, and content at large, is the audience isn't kind. Like the audience doesn't pay for what they like, so they'll give you validation on social media, and they'll give you your likes, and you'll get your views and engagement numbers. But when you put a paywall, they're just like, cool, I will move on from you, and there'll be somebody else who can give me this information for free. Yes, might be lower quality, but I want it for free. I don't want to pay, right? So I think that subscription model is the challenge, is that, like, after a point, if the platforms that you're publishing on are no longer paying you well enough, right? Like the way YouTube monetizes, or those kind of things, if that's not happening, it's a real struggle, right? So to be able to put out, like you're saying, that quality of animation, that quality of storytelling, really going out to the grassroots, and it costs money, right? So for people, and these aren't NGOs, they're not people who are doing this for charity. They need to make money out of it, like it's their livelihood. So I think I wouldn't say it's fair to say the consumer picks, because the consumer still likes these places, but ultimately they're like, oh, if it shuts down, something else will come up and I will follow wherever that goes. But I don't want to part with my money to pay a subscription. Even when Netflix existed, like, you would just have people who would just keep on trying to go on a free plan, that free trial, without actually paying a monthly subscription. So it's really hard, when the consumer wants everything but doesn't want to pay for anything. So it's that struggle which I think exists for a lot of brands.
Yeah, it does. I think we won't be like, other than I think subscription based businesses continue to struggle. Other than I think probably the bare exception of Amazon Prime, which for a reason kind of works partially, but I think pretty much all other subscription businesses, I think we don't want to pay for content. It's like
Yeah.
it's
And
like
I mean, Prime's ecosystem is different, right? Because it's
yeah,
also the whole Prime business at large, right?
yeah.
So that obviously supports the content business, but you can't necessarily benchmark on, like, if you're just pure play content, you will struggle. Like, it's hard. It's a really tough market. And we'll have to see how things progress there. But it's like everyone wants a new show every week. They want a new film every week, but they're not willing to pay. Like, they're willing to pay for it when you're buying a physical ticket. Like,
Yeah.
so it's this weird toss up when it comes to journalism, content, editorial, where suddenly people don't see value. And obviously with AI, that becomes harder and harder. And I know you wanted to avoid the AI conversation, but it just makes it more difficult for people in this space.
Yeah, it does. It does. Come to think about it, like I was talking to a friend yesterday, and we are talking about the times of like Lime torrents and U torrents.
Yeah.
Like because we were talking about Silicon Valley, so I was asking him Silicon Valley kahan aata hai aajkal? Like where can I catch it again? I was like, use HBO, but I think Hotstar delisted HBO. I was like, I'm not sure where it is, but he's like, no, I too downloaded it on torrent. So it's like
Yeah,
the entire people who were kind of born in that era, who kind of got a lot of free content, and I kind of are today in the position that they have this depth of wallet to be able to pay for content, like pay for a Spotify subscription, pay
for
for
sure.
Netflix and suite of other services, and they want to consume all of that content. But just that, like these guys have been spoiled, right? Like,
Yeah,
like people who've been doing LimeWires and uTorrents and like getting stuff for free, or like downloading PDFs instead of buying books and
for
stuff
sure.
like
It's a
that.
jugaad mindset.
It's a
I
jugaad
mean,
mindset.
yeah, and it's like that whole, no matter how much money you make, you don't leave that middle class mentality, which is like, if I can get it for free, I will do it in any shape or form. And jugaad is the way to go. So it's kind of, um, yeah, it's it. I think in other countries they're a little better with it, but you're right. Once you've been spoiled with getting stuff for free, you're not suddenly going to start wanting to pay for it. It's very difficult to break that mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like coming back to brand equity, like tell me the most harrowing experiences that you had like while there. Like sometimes you were like just doing a story and like somebody was talking and you're like, what am I even doing with my life? Like, tell me about some of those instances. If you like, they're brownie points for naming the people, but I can understand if you don't.
Yeah, I think I mean there's tons of them. I think for me, uh, the advantage of brand equity is exposure, but that's also the negative side of it is ultimately you start seeing um you get exposed to like people's lifestyles and what they're doing and things and I think things like that. And when you're putting out negative stories, you get a lot of backlash, right? So the advantage was like, for example, I think for me one of the negative things was I had done a pretty harsh story. It wasn't a harsh story; it was a honest story on what a situation was at a big corporate, and I think what was cool about it is I did it for brand equity, but because it was the Times network, it amplified within the network, right? So it got published in the newspaper, it went on Times Now, it was a headline 9 p.m. news, so it just sort of blew up much bigger than I thought it would blow up as a story, which was great for me as a journalist. It was great for Times Network. So internally, I was really getting a pat on my back for the work that I had done. But externally, I have never gotten so much like pressure from having somebody actually call me up and be like screaming at me on the phone. And I was really young at that point, right? Because like they're like, how could you publish this and you didn't tell me it's going to go on XYZ channel and it's going to be in news? And I was like, I honestly didn't know this myself, right? Like I didn't know what to say after a point. But um, I think that's where I actually saw how powerful Times is as a network, right? Because immediately when it started becoming this, and my boss was like, "Hey, you've gotten a thumbs up. You're sure your news is verified and your information is accurate. I will take it from here." And then it went to within the top of the Times network of like taking that conversation forward. They're like, "This is out of your pay grade. We've got it. We've got your back." And I think that was to me both scary and comforting, right? Like, which is suddenly where you're like, oh my God, this has gone so out of control from what I expected, right? Like, it's virality, but in a very, very different kind of way, right? And I think for me, that was uh, hard because I wasn't great with being able to deal with that kind of pressure, right? And every time, like, that's when I think I realized I was not cut out for journalism because I was like, as soon as I need to put out something that's really hard hitting and it should be something that I get a high out of, being like, look at my story, it's all over the place. I instead was feeling really like troubled and challenged by it. So for me, that was a point where I'd probably done my best work, but I'd also was like, I really, really don't want to be doing this on a regular basis. And I think that was the point where I realized I didn't want to necessarily be putting out news stories in this kind of manner.
I'm going to ask you which corporate it was, so might as well.
Kingfisher Airlines.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Tell me some other like example like that where you felt it's not like this is like way more authentic, but sometimes you just felt you're talking to somebody and somebody's like waxing eloquent on their campaign and making it seem like the best thing since sliced bread, and you're like, "Kya baat kar rahe ho, yaar?"
I think that kind of stuff, I mean, that was like part and parcel, right? Like you would always get some random press release and then we'd see if we wanted to speak to somebody about something and then, but ultimately we wouldn't cover it, right? Like we just wouldn't put it out. So, like that was the frustrating part is that ultimately, and that's what I find frustrating about what ADMA publications do today is that nobody does stories anymore. They just do press releases and they literally are just publishing a brand message verbatim without actually even like changing the copy of a press release, right? So I think I wish I wish people said no more often because that would just push better journalism and better content. But it's that whole loop that we're talking about, right? Not enough people just like keeping things moving, not enough. It's all of that that kind of feeds into it. But that like the pakao mindset of like somebody just rambling jargon at you, I think would happen every other day. It was nothing new.
So you did a few years of that, and but tell me about the agency brand kind of divide, and like it's just like you've been on both sides, and it just seems like other than of course being compensated unfairly, right? And I really feel that the incentives are so misaligned on the agency side, and with the kind of uh, value that is created and the kind of work that's put in, like it's always unfairly kind of compensated. So where are you on that debate, and why does it happen? Why does it continue to happen?
Yeah, I think it's a hard one, and honestly, like I didn't understand how bad the divide was until I actually made the shift to the other side. But I think it's a lot to do with getting an MBA. To be honest, like I feel like getting that MBA stamp is what automatically changes your salary bracket in the early stages of your career, right? When you grow older and as you sort of rise to the top, then you see a lot of people making that switch over. But I think it's literally the pedigree that people give to somebody having an MBA or doing a communication or advertising degree, right? I think that's the differentiator, because in those early stages you won't land that FMCG marketing job, which is what starts changing the pay bracket. um, but I think besides that, I think the challenge is that people try to really differentiate between agency folk and marketing folk, and a lot of the agency folks do that themselves, when actually you're doing the same thing. And I hate it when it's sort of built into this whole narrative of like, oh, client feedback versus agency feedback. Like I find that narrative really annoying, because um, you're actually a team, and that's kind of how I try to work with my agency partners now that I'm on the other side of the table. It's like we're one team. I'm happy to brainstorm with you. I'm happy to build the campaign with you. You don't have to present a deck that you're already married to. Let's work on it together. And then come to approaching a campaign in the same mindset, or doing that together. And I think a lot of companies, at least the consumer tech companies, are evolving where they see the value of getting agency sort of hires within the ecosystem. Um, so I think that's the one positive shift I've seen between this whole like agency marketing dynamic, where you're actually seeing a lot more crossover happen than it did possibly when I was making the shift. Because when I was applying, from an agency to get to the other side of the table, it was so much rejection because it wasn't as common as it is today. Today, you're actually seeing a lot of, like, in fact, so many agencies are starting to put blockers to prevent their people from leaving their ecosystem, right? So there are these no poaching policies between clients that you're actually working with, and there's all of that. So I think the agencies, instead of paying their folks better, are just creating more and more barriers for people to join agencies. So I'm rambling a little bit with this answer, but that's kind of like my thoughts around the dynamics between agencies and marketing folks.
Yeah, I feel very strongly about it, and you're right. I think for good or bad, I think that MBA thing kind of just creates some kind of a proxy in your head that somehow market forces are supposed to now reward you better for doing the same shit.
Yeah.
Uh, so like,
It still exists though. Like for example, I can never get an FMCG marketing job. Like I don't think, just because I don't have an MBA, and
but do you want to?
no, I don't plan to. Like I just never saw the value of getting a degree, and I think I've done decently enough in my career without it, and I know enough companies that will still hire me without having an MBA. So why would I spend like an obnoxious amount of money, take a break from earning a salary to get a piece of paper? I don't think it's required in today's day and age.
Yeah, I think Zara, I deeply believe that I think these schools are failing marketers. Like considering, because what you knew yesterday versus what you know today, and what you know today versus what's going to be actually required tomorrow. There's like a big gap. They're not doing enough. And I happen to be a part of the academic side. Like I'm halfway through a PhD thing also, so slightly more intimate with some of the professors. Nobody's got it figured out. It's just and the siloification, if that's a word, of like academia and these worlds don't talk to each other. Their incentives are misaligned. Either they want to publish papers which nobody reads at all, like other than that small clique of people. Here there are people who are just who are playing a very different game with different incentives, right? It's
Yeah.
never going to be aligned with each other. So to be able to play this game better, going to that ecosystem and kind of trying to get something out of it, which I just don't think it works.
No,
I
absolutely. I think it still works possibly for FMCG because the structure of supply chain, price point, creating different SKUs, all of that makes sense when you're doing traditional marketing. For consumer tech brands, zero value comes out of these degrees, right? So I'm like, the courses aren't built, the courses haven't evolved to what marketing is today across the board. for FMCG, yes, I agree. It can still work. And that's probably why FMCG companies still look at MBA hires. But I'm like, through this course materials, like after a point, how much of this really adds value to the work that I'm doing? I don't see myself leaving consumer tech. I mean, tomorrow I might, who knows what will happen, but I would see myself still structuring within consumer tech companies and working in companies that are pure play digital, e-commerce, that space. Those models of marketing don't work for these businesses. So you might as well learn it yourself because nobody's really figured it out completely yet.
No, absolutely. I think the traditional MBA marketing education, and this is from the US and how it started and kind of also became like an India thing from the 60s and the 70s. These schools were just placement offices for FMCGs, like these multinationals, to hire talent, and that's how like the curriculum started being engineered to make sure that they're giving high quality talent to our levers and like all of those aspirational jobs at that point in time. But now I truly believe that for a marketer in 2024, she absolutely, she like, the default answer is not कि मेरे को Unilever में job चाहिए, right? She wants to build a career in tech marketing, right? She wants to get
Yeah,
into a Netflix, Google, or an Amazon, or kind of build with one of the early stage startups in consumer tech. So I think the aspirations are changing, but
for
the
sure.
marketing education is kind of still stuck in that decade, and it is still very FMCG centric, and that's why I feel a lot of FMCG folks, when they make this switch into tech, and so many of them like do super well, but so many of them struggle because
Yeah,
the thing is like you have to like start learning things, like start thinking consumer, start thinking conversion, and uh, start thinking very functionally
yeah,
suddenly, and that kind of like folks don't take to it well, right? And a lot of
yeah. It's an
FMCG folks,
adjustment on both sides for sure.
like a lot of those folks kind of come in with the answer कि hey, this is how marketing is supposed to be done, but
Yeah,
नहीं boss, इधर तो कुछ और story चल रहा है, right? मतलब
yeah.
this is yeah. But tell me, how did Netflix happen? Right? Let's just segue into that.
Netflix. So it was like you're saying, like it's always one of those companies that you want to work at, right? Like it's aspirational and great place to work in a lot of senses. I was at Vice when a role opened up at Netflix, and somebody I knew at Vice had actually shifted to Netflix already, like maybe 6 months prior. So it was a referral through there that sort of opened the doors for me. I started there as a social media marketing person, right? So the reason I got that job was because at Vice, a lot of my role was audience development and sort of building community, building partnerships, sort of figuring out how to scale up business. And I worked on a project with Amazon Prime, which was for Mirzapur. We did Go Say Crime, which was a crime-based reality show, not reality show, but docu-series around what had actually happened. And the work that I did was sort of like building out that IP along with obviously a much larger team. And then I also worked quite closely with Budex with Budweiser for the Budex Music Festival. So these were just interesting ways of, and I did the entire influencer leg for that, right? So I think running those pieces helped showcase how I was strong as a social media digital marketer. So I think that really helped. And then prior to Vice, I had built out Vitamins 3 when I was at Supari Studios, right? So again, creating strong community, creating a digital brand, creating social community from scratch with a very, very niche audience, right? So a female forward audience on the internet is hard to create, and we had a 90% female audience and very engaged, driven group of women. So I think those were the things that really sold me as a good hire for Netflix for social media at that point. And then I did that for a year, and kind of applied for a position when it opened up for a full funnel marketing on the films and series marketing team, and then transitioned there because in that year that I was on the social team, I also showed that I could scale up campaigns quite well. So I think just step by step built myself within the ecosystem there.
But how was the culture change for you? Like, and how was the platform change and the canvas you had in front of you? Like, all of those changes, I'm sure it was step change, right? So how's that for you?
Yeah, I think for me, I worked really well with structure, with orgs that have strong structure, right? So I think Netflix as an organization is really well structured in terms of how they have scaled up their organization, the whole angle of freedom and responsibility, right? So even in terms of your autonomy to be able to run things, but also where do you make sure leadership is brought in? I think the way they've sort of balanced that out in terms of trusting people they've hired as well as making sure that you're aligning with the whole larger business strategy. I think that was one thing I really enjoyed, because I work well in those kind of ecosystems. Similar kind of environment for me in Duolingo, where there's a similar kind of approach towards autonomy of you being able to do your work, but also working in a global org, right? So I think those things were things that I liked. Um, I think work hours is hard. I think if you work in entertainment marketing, that's across the board, because a lot of your work happens weekends. A lot of your work happens late night. Just because you're working with the entertainment industry that is more oriented to that as a structure, which was harder for me, because I am more a morning person in some shape or form. I work better in the day, so I would end up working very, very long hours. So that was a bit harder. Which people figure out. Like, people figure out their own systems in terms of what works for them. But I think that was one of the challenges for me. I think in terms of exposure, massive shift, right? Because suddenly anything you do is visible, right? So you really have to be completely buttoned up, because if you're not, people will call you out for the smallest things. Because you said this in the beginning of our conversation, right? Like, everyone knows marketing, everyone knows content, everyone knows Bollywood. So this was kind of two things coming together, where people know Bollywood and people know marketing. So every little bit that you put out was questioned. So you needed to be super sharp with creatives that you're putting out, and you're putting it out at a very, very high volume. So that was challenging, but I think really made me much sharper as a marketer. Um, and some of my skills as a journalist really helped in terms of being able to turn things out quickly. So overall, really enjoyed my time there for sure.
What was like some like super memorable work that you did, and some work you thought okay, could have been done slightly better?
I really enjoyed working on Money Heist. I think that's one of my big highlights. It was the last season. It was getting to work really closely with the Spain team at Netflix. So really like understanding that international ecosystem, thinking out of the box, because we couldn't really work with the talent, right? So suddenly you're promoting a show with a very different ecosystem in India, but you want to do it big scale. So how do you make that happen? So I really enjoyed doing that. I really enjoyed working on Stranger Things, because that's a show I love personally. It's a show I really I'm a fan of. So just even though it wasn't a massive campaign in India, we did a few things, but we did those few things really well. But as a personal piece, I really enjoyed working on that. I really enjoyed working on Kaki, the first season, just because it was such a different show for me, right? Like, it's Heartland, Neeraj Pandey, just kind of cop drama. So not the vibe of content I consume, but definitely content that works well in India, right? So how do you showcase that? It was also the last show I worked on before I left Netflix, so a little personal to me in those senses. Those I think were some that top of mind I really enjoyed. Really enjoyed working on Indian matchmaking, because that was when I was on the social media team, and that blew up during COVID. So I actually produced a virtual reunion show for that on YouTube, which was really interesting. Like, so getting that cast together, and this was the first season, getting that whole cast together and getting them to talk about all of the unanswered questions. I think that was exciting. In terms of work that I think I could have done better, Fabulous Lives of Bollywood Wives, I think, was one that I struggled with a little bit, just because I think we could have owned it a little more. Like, I feel like we were a little safe in terms of, oh, people are gonna hate on us because it's a reality show. I'm like, people hate on all reality shows, but they love to watch it. So how do you own that a little more? I think I was also pretty early on in my career there, so I didn't have I wish I had more confidence to be like, hey guys, let's just go out there and have some more fun with this, which we did in some shapes and forms, but I think it could have been stronger.
Yeah, I think it's a good problem to have. Like somehow I feel like the person who does that kind of a job, I think it's one of the most coveted roles in marketing. It's also one of the more in India, and also one of the most the ones which come with like the highest amount of responsibility, because like in a way that you're creating these like huge funnels for like folks to come in and get introduced to these shows and these characters and these stories. And I think there's a responsibility also to it, like to make sure that folks are introduced to Delhi crime and then to spark those conversations. uh,
Yeah.
I I think it's a stunning place for a marketer to be in, but also like बहुत pressure है यार.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's also a lot of fun because the thing is, ultimately, your job is entertainment, right? Your job is like, yes, you are doing some stuff that sparks cultural conversation. You are sort of creating pop culture in the country in some shape or form, but it's also ultimately entertainment, right? Which is really exciting and fun, and you, as a result, get to do really, really innovative things, right? You want to do stuff that is different and out of the box, and you don't necessarily have to be married to how much of my product am I selling. It's like, how do I create impact and how do I celebrate my brand? Which I think removes a lot of the other marketing shackles that exist in other companies, right? So I think there's a lot of fun that comes with the challenges of it as well, which also then makes it an exciting job for sure.
So let's like get into your current role, like Duolingo, and I'm like super biased because that's like I was reading about it just last week. So I'm just saying this is the bloody case study. Like in case you have to really get how to do content properly. Like I consider Duo right up there with Colonel Sanders and the Amul girl. I think it's
Yeah.
already there, and just to be able to do that in India and kind of bring that in, like a lot of the shine which is already created globally, how the brand used TikTok, and there's just so much to unwrap
Yeah,
on
it's
this
a
brand
case
that
study in social media marketing for sure.
yeah, it's they've got so many things right. So tell me, like when you joined, like how much of the work were you already familiar with? Did you feel the pressure? Excited? Like just tell me about the early days.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is I also work for the Duolingo English Test and not the language app, so I don't get to do a lot of the absolutely unhinged fun Duo content. But that was also intentional, right? In the sense of I joined the Duolingo English Test because one is I'm kind of building that from scratch in the market, so I love the challenge of being employee number one for my product in the country. So there were I mean, there's one other person for the language app in very small team in India right now, right? We work remote, we don't have too many people on ground, and I think that challenge really excited me because, like you said, I knew a lot about the brand and I knew what it was doing. I knew that it was an innovative marketing company, so a company that really values marketing, because there are a lot of companies that don't see value in marketing as a function, right? So for me, finding a company that values that was important. Netflix, Duolingo, both companies that really think marketing is an important part of their business. And for the Duolingo English Test, I think it was really interesting because suddenly you have this really cool brand which exists for the company at large, but nobody knows about the Duolingo English Test, right? So how do you build awareness? And this is a product that has a very large market in India, right? So the highest volume of test takers for the DT are in India. So suddenly there's a lot of value that comes from being an Indian in the market, kind of running that product. Um, so I really enjoyed the challenge. Like I've literally taken this job because of the challenge behind building from scratch, but in that larger ecosystem. Um, but yeah, I think the hard part for me is how do you leverage the brand love that Duo has, but separate it to highlight what your product is? How do you make sure you're still driving growth? How are you building trust? Because this is a very high stakes product. People take the DT when they want to study abroad, right? So it's no longer just frivolous. It has to be high stakes. And then you're taking on big ticket competitors, right? Like old legacy brands that have existed for a long time. You're a disruptor because you've sort of taken this test digital, which has never existed before. We were talking about education in general, right? Like the need for stuff to evolve. And the idea is that this test is that evolution in this part of the industry. And I found that exciting. So very, very different from what I was doing, very different from even what Duolingo was doing at large, but exciting opportunity for me personally.
It's a stunning story, like starting at UTVI and like coming on to where you are today. Like if you were to like let me get my shrink hat back on. Like if you were to talk to like Tara, who's just gotten the UTVI job and she fucking hates it, then what would be like things you would tell her that
Don't go to journalism school. I would have revisited my my undergrad and postgraduate education and sort of what starting point that would have had for me. Because I think I lost 6 years of my career kind of doing that stuff. And I mean, it's a little unfair to also say that because like I learned a lot during my journalism days, and I think it really built my skill sets. But it was like it's a bit of it's chicken and egg, right? I feel like I've lost that time, but I also feel like I gained a lot at that point. But yeah, I think if I could change it, it would probably be that point being like, don't have that funnel of like, it's only one way of being able to see what you want to do. I think I was so married to being a journalist, and I would have like given myself the advice being like, explore what else exists out there before you really go all in into something like this.
But what else? Like other than not going to journalism school, like what would you like? How would you tell her that hey, it's gonna be okay. You're gonna do amazing things, and you're gonna work on amazing
You're
things.
saying from a more positive positive
Yeah,
perspective. No, so I think I always had that. I did have that positivity. I think throughout I always was like, this there is going to be an end to this. Like I think I've always been stubborn to tell myself like, hey, things will get better from here. You just have to keep at it. Like I think the few things that I've been good at in my career is um no matter what the job, I've never looked at it as a small job, right? So it's always been like, you've given me this project, I will do my best at this project. So it was always, no matter whether it's writing a caption or it's doing a stupid PR note coverage or it's doing a big ticket story or whatever it was, like I think for me it's always been give it your 100% and like be proud of whatever output you're putting out. So I think sticking to that I think was important. um I think I would have maybe told myself to uh push myself a little earlier, because I feel like at some points I thought about things, but I was like, maybe I'm not ready for it. I feel like I could have started the process of trying to find jobs sooner. Um, but yeah, I think the main thing was just some decisions that I was really stubborn about. I would have just asked myself to open up my mindset a little more. Um, and I would have asked myself to be a better negotiator over time, because I feel like a lot of us forget that we can ask for more. We should be a little more put a little more emphasis on our own worth versus being like, oh, a company's doing us a favor. I think that's an evolution that took way too long to happen, and I would have told her that as well.
I think you're being too hard on young Tara. Like she's just trying to make it. And you're like, no, push yourself. नहीं करना यार उसको push हो. मतलब she's just
I've
trying
become
to.
that auntie now, right? So now I have to give her a hard time.
But I absolutely love it. So we'll segue into. I know you run a lot. So like to quote a famous author, what do you think about when you think about running?
Oh, my favorite book. I love it. Yeah, for me, I think running is like therapy to me. So I think it's like a lot more than just running. So I don't think about anything when I run. So for me, it's actually kind of meditative. So that's why, especially when I run long distance, people are like, "Oh my god, that's so boring. What do you do?" Like, and I'm like, actually, my brain just switches off at that point, and I'm just kind of focused on. It's actually like, and I realize that these are similar patterns that people follow when they meditate, right? So you're focused on your breathing, you're focused on kind of emptying your mind. Initially, when I used to run, I used to just count, because you're kind of counting to measure like how much time. So it's like, okay, if I'm running this distance, whatever, this is my pace, all of that. So and then I learned later on that even counting is a practice that people use when they're trying to meditate. So I was like, oh, this is interesting, because I've never been able to actually sit and meditate. And then I realized that when I'm running, that's probably what I'm doing in some shape or form. So for me, it's kind of therapeutic in that way. It's time for myself. So I've tried running in groups before. At one point, I was trying to get my husband to start running. And then I realized I didn't actually enjoy that as much. I actually enjoy running the most when I like running in groups sometimes, but I actually really, really enjoy it the most when it's just my time for myself. So um, I haven't been doing it as much as I should be these days, because like I think when you stop, it's really hard to get back, especially when you were running pretty competitively or whatever, decently well at some point. So I think for me, I've struggled to kind of get back to it, but it's something that's definitely important.
Yeah, they say that the toughest run is the one out of the house or something like that, right? Like I wouldn't know about it. I couldn't run if a dog chases me. So, but there you go. I was like, "ठीक काट ले यार," मतलब it's okay. Something about it. But I absolutely I really enjoyed this conversation, Tara. So just like one final question out there, like for somebody who's 22, 23, wants to land an interview with you, what can they do in the next 30 days? I always like to round it out with this question, so that when they meet you eventually and have a conversation with you, they can like absolutely floor you and get hired.
I think look for the opportunity once it opens up, right? So I think what happens is that a lot of people spam you across platforms, right? And sometimes in very intrusive ways, right? Like I sometimes get like I get tons of calls and emails and messages on LinkedIn on a regular basis that it just loses the value after a point, right? Like I've initially used to try to really respond as much as possible, but after a point you just lose the ability to do that. So I feel like one is find the just look out for that opportunity when they're available, right? I've had a couple of roles that have been running for some time, which are now close to closing. But at that point, that was a great time for people to reach out. A lot of them did. And for me, what stood out to the ones that I've actually gotten in touch with and have, uh, some of them are in the process of almost getting an offer right now. I think what they did was really showcased the fit between the role and their skill set, right? Or even having self-awareness of, hey, I have 8 of these 9 skills. The ninth one I don't have, but that self-awareness I think is really great. So that fit between the role and why you are the good person to be hired for that, I think is number one. I think the second is also, even if you've gotten my phone number from somebody or my email address from somebody, is setting context and not just trying to, sorry, I don't know why that.
That's okay. Yeah,
uh,
I think somebody like kind of liked that advice. So please go ahead.
yeah, but I think sorry, I lost my train of thought. Yeah, I think being able to reach out to say like, hey, is this a good time? Like I think that people have forgotten that basic layer of formality of like, just because you've got somebody's number doesn't mean you call them 20 times and expect them to answer. I think really setting context is important. I used to do this when I was a journalist a lot as well, right? Like I'll be reaching out to people, cold calling them, but it would always be like, hey, I'm so and so, I'm reaching out because of XYZ. Let me know when you have a good time or what is the best way to get in touch with you. And I'm saying this because it sounds so basic, but 90% of people do not do this. And that automatically changes your, like the person you're reaching out to's mindset, to that conversation. Because I'm just like, you've irritated me before you even said 3 sentences, right? So I think that's the second advice in terms of just having a little civic sense in some ways when you're cold calling or reaching out. And then the third thing is, if you have a referral, that's one of the best ways to actually get in touch with people, right? So you somebody somebody who can validate your work, who might know the person that's hiring, is a great way to break the ice, because when the referral comes from that person, even if it's a text message or an informal introduction, that's a great starting point. That's how I've landed most of my jobs, to be honest.
Thank you very much, Tara. I think I got a lot from this, and thank you so much for speaking to me. And I think of course, our listeners will get as much out of it as I did. Thank you for giving up your Sunday afternoon to kind of speak with me and our listeners,
No worries.
and we'll keep kind of tracking and stalking you while you're out on a meditative run or kind of doing the great things that you do at Duolingo and beyond. Thank you again, Tara.
Great chatting with you. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you.